Hello! Welcome back to another Saturday stream. Hope everybody's had a good week. I made a couple of audio changes. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Can you hear me? Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Fingers crossed. Hoping that OBS is not completely fried today. Because you never know. I'm thinking we might be good. Maybe. Looks like I'm seeing levels on my level meter, and I've got the mic configured for stream output, so hopefully everybody can hear me. Fingers crossed. Anyway, squeak in the comments if you can't hear me. Yeah, so today we are, well, the plan was today to try and get my crusty old PowerMac on the Global Talk shenanigans that are going on right now. If you're not aware, a whole bunch of vintage Mac aficionados right now are using or maybe abusing the old Appletalk internet router. Thank you, Trina says we can hear you. Awesome, fantastic. Are using and maybe abusing the Appletalk internet router software that Apple developed in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s. Yes, really. Late 80s and early 90s. Appletalk internet router. Yeah. Just let that sink in for a minute. Whoever was running Apple's internet or Apple's networking team back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was like a skunk works. Like they were doing stuff nobody else was doing. Anyway, a whole bunch of vintage Mac aficionados right now are using and abusing that software to interconnect local Appletalk networks all over the world. Literally all over the world. And you can just reach out and, grab files off of someone else's, Mac 2 CI that's running this software, or, print to someone's networked laser writer or something that happens to be, on the Global Talk network. So the plan today was to try and get my old PowerMac on Global Talk, because one thing I'd noticed is that none of the Macs that were connected to this thing appeared to be PowerPC. And I've been futzing with it all morning, and there's a reason none of the Macs on Global Talk are PowerPC. So we're not going to get real far with the stated goal of the stream today, but I can show you some cool stuff. Anyway, so let's see who is here in chat. Let's say hi before we dig in. Everything's Broken Garage. Hello, welcome to the stream. Ryzen 9 3900 XT, hello, welcome to the stream. Unfortunately, I won't be able to run SpeedSys on this machine, but I do have MacBench, so we can do that. Trina is here, of course, from Trina's Technobabble. Hello, welcome to the stream. Also, we've got Kellen here, hello. Hear you fine, howdy, hello. How's it going? Hopefully you've had a good week. Ryzen 9 says that IBM XT era. Yeah, so the thing is, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that Apple took a pretty substantial lead when they introduced the original Macintosh. In 1984, they had a fully graphical operating system with pull-down menus and buttons and, text fields and drag and drop, all in 84, and by 1986, 87, revisions to the OS had made it extremely powerful. But Microsoft was not super far behind. Apple kind of, if I'm being honest, they kind of squandered their lead back in the 90s. They had this incredibly versatile operating system. The architecture was maybe not the best, which is probably why they struggled so much to really modernize it over the years. But yeah, it was, when you realize like the version 2 of the Appletalk internet router, version 2, was released by Apple in 1989. 1989! What was the state of the internet back then? I think it was just Gopher, right? And apparently a bunch of Macs running Appletalk. Completely wild. So the version that everybody's using online right now is version 3, I think version 3.01 maybe, which was released in 93, so it's compatible with Mac System 7, which is important because if you don't know like how the Mac System software versions work, you had System 1.0 and came out with the Mac 128K, technically 1.0. The first few version numbers are kind of fuzzy up till like System 3.4. System 5 was a defined release, right? And then System 6 was like the really popular, what I call early classic macOS release. So you had System 6 from 6.0 through 6.08. That each release added some more features, including at one point multitasking. System 6 got the first cooperative multitasking in macOS, and that was about what, 1991, 1992, I think? System 6 generally was a black and white OS, but because the Mac 2 was released in that time frame, it got color support through Color Quick Draw. And then System 7 was kind of a unification of all of the various plugins and pieces that made up System 6. They kind of got unified together into System 7. And that was... System 7 was when things really started to roll. And so the version 3 of the Appletalk Internet Router is the one that works with System 7. And I think specifically, the guide that I found mentioned System 7.1, which was obviously a point release, but a pretty major update. It started the use of the system enabler files. We gotta dive a little bit into the Mac architecture, right? So the original Mac had 128K of RAM, 128K of RAM, right? So like Commodore 64, 64K. Yeah, the original Mac only had double the RAM of the Commodore 64, and it was fully graphical, 512 by 342 display, right? Fully graphical. It didn't have enough RAM, so in order to get it to do the things that they needed it to do, they put a lot of the routines into ROM, and they continued to do this throughout the classic Mac era. And then once System 7.1 came around, you saw system enabler files, and these were sort of unified ROM-style patches that you could load into memory, into ROM addresses, and they would act like ROM and RAM. The ROMs were important. They did things like, rendering the cursor, things that wouldn't change a whole lot, like rendering pull-down menus, rendering windows, rendering the cursor. And all of these things started to get overwritten as the OS evolved and as the classic Macs evolved. Obviously, we moved from black and white Macs to color Macs. Rather than put color drawing routines into new ROMs and burn new ROMs, you could overlay them using system extensions and system enabler files. So, anyway, what I've discovered is that when you go to install the Appletalk Internet Router, again, Apple's networking team must have been doing some skunkworks level stuff, because it does some direct patching of the system file, which is... system file is basically macOS, classic macOS's kernel. There isn't a kernel, there isn't like user privilege separation or anything, but all of the core routines for the OS exist in the system file. Anything that has to be accessed and moved into RAM and then executed as a system procedure exists in the system file. And for older versions of macOS, that also includes where your desk accessories were, because that was the only way you could multitask in early macOS. So that's why desk accessories got moved into the system file. Because they basically got hung off this procedure call tree, or this function tree, where they would get a little slice of time as the system went through and did all of its desk accessories. That's why you had to merge them into the system file directly. Later versions of macOS made this a little easier. You could just drag a desk accessory into the system file, and it would merge it in automatically. You didn't have to use a third-party utility to do that. And then, of course, fonts got moved out of the system file into a separate folder, and they would be scanned and loaded dynamically in later versions of macOS. But early versions of macOS, it's a graphical operating system. You gotta have your fonts ready at a moment's notice to put them on the screen. If an application calls for a font, it's gotta be there. That's why they got merged into the system file. So this installer, when you install the Appletalk Internet Router, it does some direct patching of the system file. And since this is something from 1993, Power Macintoshes didn't exist yet at that point. PowerPC was a glimmer in Apple's eye, but there were no released Power Macs at that point. So it patches in 68K code, right, for the 68,000 processors that the classic Macs had. Which means, if you install this, which I have managed to install it on this Power Mac, it patches in the code and renders your system completely unbootable. Completely unbootable. You can't even, like, hold down Shift to turn off system extensions. No, your system file's basically corrupted by this installer, and it doesn't boot anymore. So, there's a reason that everyone on Global Talk has been using a 68K Mac, because you have to. There's no other option. The Appletalk Internet Router is not just a collection of system extensions that, you know, add some cool IP networking stuff to Appletalk. It apparently patches in some system routines, which I imagine probably use interrupts. There's a trick to multitasking in classic macOS where you hook an interrupt and then you can run a piece of code periodically on a processor interrupt. That's usually used for things like networking or sound. If you're doing sound playback, you'll usually hook whatever process is filling the sound buffer, you'll hook it into the interrupt so that it fills regularly, no matter what's running on the system. And that's probably what it's doing. That's my guess. As it's patching in some code in the system file that's going to run on an interrupt and, you know, allow you to do packet routing on classic macOS between your local Appletalk network and this global Appletalk network. So yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. In my investigation, though, I found some interesting stuff, and I'd like to show some of it to you all. Let's see. We've got some more folks in chat now, so let's see who else is here. We've got Clarjon One Plus. Hello, welcome to the stream. Good to see ya. Dave's Vintage Appletech. Hello, Dave. How's it going? Good to see ya. Also, Starbuck Tech. Hello. Good evening. Good afternoon. That's all we've got so far. So, let me flip over to the capture card. So, I'm currently, as I said, I've been screwing around with this all day, and I'm currently trying to make a clean System 7.1 image, because apparently there's an image floating around somewhere that has all this stuff installed. You can just drop it into an emulator. I can't find it, so I'm making my own. And this is, I think, one of the last steps. I just need to get the router IP extension for the Appletalk Internet Router installed. But that's what I was doing before I started the stream. And this is going to go on this disk, Mac Air. This has been a lot. All these files are obviously, you know, StuffIt and BinHex files. Some of them are Adaptec Toast images. It's kind of the state of classic Mac software is kind of chaotic. And this project is no less chaotic than anything else in classic Mac software. You've got IMG files, you've got DSK files for images, and these are just floppy images, which if you just load them, will quite happily pull up a disk duplicator, right? Expecting you to write these to a disk. An actual physical disk. So you need a Mac that has a functional floppy drive, so you can write these disks. Super annoying. Thankfully, I have a few Macs that have functional floppy drives still. And that's been a lifesaver, to just be able to write the software out to a disk and then install it. Oh, but it's been quite a journey. My current hope, as I said, is to try and get this disk here. I try and image this disk, Mac Air, and run it in like Basilisk 2. This currently has System 7.1 installed on it. It's got the updates as suggested by the guide, and it's got the Apple Internet Router installed into it. But of course, it won't boot on this hardware. It's a Power Mac. It won't boot It won't boot classic macOS without it being either 712 if you have a 6100, 7100, 8100, or in the case of this machine being a PowerMac 7200, it won't boot it unless it's system 752 at least, which is what we're on. This is just a stock install of the restore CD for the PowerMac 7200, so we are running base system 752. It's kind of terrible, honestly. 752 is not my favorite version of macOS, but my original attempt was to try and just get this installed on this base OS, which of course did not work. It really destroys things. So just as a quick demonstration of why this will not work, right? So in early versions of Open Transport enabled macOS, so this is another thing, okay? This is another thing. So because the Mac had networking so early, I think Appletalk was released in '86, and then every Mac that was made, I'm pretty sure even the 128Ks, had some high-speed serial connectors that could do networking. These used local talk adapters. I don't know if you've ever seen these, but let me switch to the big camera so you all can see it. This might be a blast from the past for anybody who was in education back in the 90s. Had a bunch of Macs in their school. This is a particular type of local talk connector. This is PhoneNet, which was a low-cost version of Apple's own local talk connector. So this plugs into the mini DIN serial port on the back of a Mac. And then you've got, basically you build up, not really a star-based network. It's more of a ring, kind of just a giant hub of connectors here using, it's just literal, it's not even RJ45, it's just phone cable. Just 4-conductor phone cable. And I'm pretty sure it only even uses 2 of those conductors. Because I think one of the big advantages to PhoneNet over traditional local talk was you could actually run PhoneNet inside your PBX, or not inside your PBX, but inside your phone wiring. If you were in a school or a hospital or something, you had desk phones that had phone cabling running to them, and you could run this right alongside and just have computers networked at people's desks without any additional cables, basically. So, oh boy, where was I? Right, so Macs had networking very early. It just didn't look like networking we're used to today because network standards weren't really a thing in 1984 and 1986. Ethernet existed and Token Ring existed. They were both really expensive and a little experimental. And Apple had actually spec'd the original Mac with these super high-end serial connectors just for doing simple local talk or simple local area networking. And that's what they ended up releasing in '86 with Appletalk. So that network stack that existed in '86 and was carried on through to 1995 is the classic networking stack, and you can see that here in this network software selector. That is the classic networking stack it's talking about. And then with the PowerMacs and with System 7.5, they introduced Open Transport, which was based on the Streams network stack, I think from BSD, from BSD Unix. Not sockets, but streams. A lot of people did not like Open Transport. Mostly because the classic networking, if you had an 030 and an 040 processor, it was fine. It's perfectly functional. It was quick enough, got the job done. And Open Transport was a little complicated. It was like the OpenGL of its day for networking. Like OpenGL is for graphics, Open Transport was kind of for networking. But here's the thing: if you have 7.5 installed on a Quadra, something with the 68040, and you hit use classic networking, all is well. The OS will switch some things around in the system folder, and you'll have your classic networking control panels like Mac IP and stuff like that. You try and do it on a PowerMac, and it says no. Classic Appletalk is not supported on your CPU, so Apple never ported the classic Appletalk stack to PowerPC. They re-implemented it in OpenTransport, and it's a shadow of its former self in OpenTransport. It does exist, and you can connect Appletalk to the internet. For example, if I do this, let's see if we are connected. We're connected to the Ethernet right now. So if I do Appletalk, say where am I connected to my Appletalk? Oh, what did I do? Oh, what did I do? Let me delete that preferences file. I think I probably tried to get to it from a different disk when, you know, something got corrupted and blew up. So 1 second. Preferences. And I want... Where is my Appletalk preferences? There they are. So if we pull up the Appletalk control panel, not color, Appletalk please. I need to clean this mouse. And we go to, that's not what I want. I want user mode, advanced. So we're connected over Ethernet, but these are defaults. Like, we're not actually connected to an Appletalk network, unfortunately, despite having the Appletalk, datagram packets routed in here through my external internet router. Unfortunately, it's not. We're not getting anything through. And so you can select. So the point of the Appletalk router, right, is that you can route between different ports. In this case, you can only use one. You only use one port for Appletalk. So we don't get any file servers, we don't get any zones we get to select, unfortunately. So yeah, it's not gonna work on the PowerMac. Unfortunately. I also found something interesting while I was searching around. We'll run some Macbench on this in a minute. But I found, God, this is just a complete mess. All this stuff on my desktop. I hate it. Get out of here. While I was messing around, I found this Liaison. It appears to be a competitor to the Appletalk Internet Router from Farallon. If you don't know who Farallon is, I believe this one's a Farallon. Is it Farallon? No, that is a Focus. I think I've got one from Farallon over here. Is that Asante? No, that's not even Asante. I've got a Farallon phone net adapter around here anywhere. Farallon was a huge vendor of Mac networking gear throughout the late 80s and early 90s. They did, and I don't mean not just like phone net stuff, but like they made Appletalk compatible switches. They built an Appletalk Internet Router appliance. Obviously they made network cards for Mac 2s and early PowerMacs to get on networks. Farallon was a big deal back in the 90s, and they apparently built a competitor to the Appletalk Internet Router called Liaison. Liaison also does not run on this, unfortunately. But I found all the Liaison installer files, and you know what it does run on? It runs on my Mac Plus. So I can at least show you some of the interface of Liaison. Oh, more stuff. Okay, put that in there. My hope is that I'll have this this disk I can image and run in an emulator, and maybe get it onto the Global Talk network. I guess we'll see. Anyway, let's see if we can get you guys. Trinus is quick. Somebody get Tech Ambrosia beige Mac. I have one functional 68K Mac, and that is my Mac Plus over here. But I don't have a Blue SCSI V2 for it because I haven't installed Big Bad Biologist's excellent Mac Plus internal SCSI mod yet. Seems a little daunting, but I do want to put it in there. And all of my external Blue SCSIs are Blue SCSI V1, unfortunately, including the Blue SCSI that this is actually booting off of. It's booting off of a V1 perfectly fine. Which if you followed my Mac journey earlier, about maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago now at this point, trying to get a Blue SCSI V1 to boot on this PowerMac was just not happening. So let's see. This is an absolute mess. I wasn't planning on showing y'all my Mac Plus. It's in a kind of sorry state because I'm very messy. I have a lot of stuff sitting on its poor keyboard. It's so neglected. Let's see. See if we can get you a front row seat. There we go. Okay. Hey, look at that. Okay, let's switch over to the bench cam then, and y'all can get the chat out of the way so you don't have to read that. And let's switch over to the bench cam. There we go. It's not the best, but I think it'll probably do. Sorry, Clippy. Need the room. So, this disk is going to boot the Farallon Liaison support disk, which has like a bare bones install of Liaison. I can show you some of the interface, because it doesn't completely work on here since I don't have an internet. I don't have any kind of a network connection through my Plus yet. So let's do that. Let's see if we can just turn down the brightness on that a little bit so y'all can see it. There we go. This is what using a Mac was like in 1984. Put it in the boot disk, wait for it to boot. So on this boot disk, we've got not a lot. We've got a System 6 boot system folder, and then this little guy, which you can't see, but this is called TinyTerm. It very literally is a tiny little terminal program. That's it. It's just... yeah, it doesn't... unless you're connected to something, it doesn't do anything. It's just a little terminal program. Little tiny terminal emulator. On a floppy. Adorable. But the way you access... Liaison is sort of similar to the internet router, except that it's all kind of automatic. You go into the chooser, which is where you choose your network connections, and there's obviously there's Apple shares you're used to, where you connect to file servers, but also there's the one here called LiaisonNet. If you click it, you can establish a liaison, TM, with any of your predefined, internet-enabled Appletalk liaison thingies. This is a little bit similar to how the Global Talk works, where you can select a zone and then you can select other things inside it through the chooser. But this is a totally different thing. I think this would be pretty fun to try and figure out how to get working, because I don't think I've seen any. I didn't even know this existed. But yeah, this is on the support disk. Your only option is to establish a liaison with Farallon Tech support, which if you look at the configuration with it, it calls their toll-free number. Or not their toll-free number, it calls their area code 510 number, and connects you into their tech support, which is kind of hilarious. So yeah, that's as far as I've gotten into any of this experimentation, is finding Liaison and actually getting it to install and work on the Mac Plus, which I thought was kind of cool. Reboot this, it's just going to boot off the blue SCSI that's on the back of it. And that'll boot up System 605. Gutbomb says, holy crap, your Mac Plus is Firewire. This is my collection of weird cards. So I've got a patched SATA controller for classic macOS. This mostly works with macOS 9. It's a silicon image SATA link, but it's had its BIOS flashed to work with macOS. It's flaky. This is an Adaptec Firewire card. I believe this is from Gutbomb. Did you send this to me? Either that or BBB sent this to me. But this is just regular Firewire. Just get 3 Firewire ports. This one's the weird one. This is an Apple prototype board. You can find these on eBay once in a while. They float around a bit. But it's like, I think it's meant for doing DV video editing. That's the only reason I can understand that it would have like SDI video outputs. along with FireWire and these two trimedia media processors. This one's weird. I don't know if I'll ever get this one to work. I'm pretty sure it doesn't do anything in the 7200. I imagine you'd need at least OS 8.6 for this one to do anything useful with it. But I think you'd probably want like a PowerMac 8600 or something for that. So yeah, this is just normal everyday System 605. You can see I have the 4 megabyte RAM expansion for this Plus, which is kind of ridiculous, but it works. This doesn't have any of the Liaison stuff installed on it. This was a this is a fresh system folder because the last time I tried messing with things, everything blew up. So I don't have anything in here at the moment. But yeah, that's a thing. So, what are we doing with ourselves for stream? That's a great question. This PowerMac is complete, it's ready to go, but it doesn't do what I want it to do. It boots the OS as I want it to boot. In fact, I've got two Blue SCSIs plugged into it right now. The V2 has several disk images in it, which is most of the stuff that you see. Most of the stuff that you see on desktop is from the Blue SCSI V2. I've got a folder full of CD-ROM images. These basically cycle. If you eject the disk, the Blue SCSI will load the next one. This is the setup CD for the 7200. That's how I got 752 on here. But I also have a dedicated OS 8.1 boot disk. Before we do that, let's run some benchmarks on it. So the specifics on this Mac, it is a PowerPC 601, just like the original Power Macs, the 6100, 7100, and 8100. They all got PowerPC 601 chips. This also got one. It runs at 75 megahertz, but instead of expansion through new bus slots, it is expandable through PCI, normal run-of-the-mill PCI. Also, this one has the 256K of level 2 cache, and that's basically the reason that we see the performance uplift we see from the 6160, which I think doesn't have the level 2 cache. Because normally you wouldn't expect a 50% uplift from a machine that's only 15 megahertz faster. But we get a more reasonable amount of uplift if I run the floating point tests. Floating point code doesn't get cached in the level 2 cache, so it doesn't see the same uplift from having the cache. This machine, it's kind of a travesty. Let me bring the camera back so y'all can see it. If you haven't seen just how awful and broken it is, that's the machine. It no longer has a case. I bought it off of eBay for $50. Yep, that didn't work. There we go. I bought this thing off of eBay for $50. Literally just $50 shipped. I don't know what I was expecting when the as far as packaging, but basically the seller put it in a giant box and put some newspaper around the edge. So when it got to me, basically all the internal plastic was shredded. The power button was broken. All the drive bay brackets are broken. The internal drive cage, or the internal card cage that this uses, was broken, and the shelf that the power supply sits on was broken. It was all broken. So I took it out of its case, and I 3D printed sort of a test bench case. You can kind of see the central support stock for it. It's not great. I don't think it's my best work. But it does hold the machine. When it's turned off, you can just grab it by that handle and move it around. So that's kind of nice. Gutbomb says the best 68K machine as far as speed and reliability is the Quadra 650. Deals are out there to be had. Yeah, Ron said the same thing to me. Ron of Ron's Computer Videos, really nice guy. Because I've been looking at a Quadra 700 for forever, because of course, why not? It's the iconic Quadra 700. But he said just get a 650 because it's easier to live with. Did I get my money? Trina asked if did I get my money back? No, since the machine booted, I thought I'd keep it. You know, it was $50. And this thing is essentially unmodified. I did image the original disc. It had a spinning hard drive in it that still worked. It sounded awful. Like sounds I've never heard a hard drive make before. This hard drive made, but it did boot from it, and I was able to image the entire drive and get a backup of it. It wasn't really anything interesting. But the fact that it booted up and worked, I didn't bother to ask for my money back, so, Gutbomb says, Quadra 700s are fun, with 650 is faster, more reliable, cheaper, and more available. Yeah, that's true. That's true. My only issue with it is it's the same case as the 7100. It's that desktop case, and I don't have the room for it. It's a me problem. It's a me problem. I'll probably get a 650 at some point. What I'd really love is a 605. Like I just said, I want a 700, but like honestly, I kind of just want a 605, just something small that that has an 040 in it, and I probably won't be able to do enough stuff with it though. I'd probably get frustrated by how limited the expansion is. HC asked a little while ago, what is a boot disk for? So, back in the bad old days, HC, I'm talking like Apple II, Commodore 64, original IBM PC. Computers didn't have hard drives. They didn't have hard drives. So the only way you can get a computer to do anything when you turned it on, unless it was like a Tandy with like ROM Basic built into it, or, you know, a Commodore 64, VIC-20, that had BASIC built into the ROM, you needed to boot it with something, and that something was usually a boot disk. And that's what a boot disk is for. And the Mac, the original Mac, comes from that era where there was nothing really. Maybe ROM Basic if you were lucky. But if you wanted to do anything with the machine, you had to boot it with a boot disk. And the original Mac booted off a floppy, a 400 kilobyte floppy, which booted the system. It also contained, Mac Write, Mac Paint, the first applications for the Mac. That was that iconic, hello in cursive that was drawn in Mac Paint back in the day, 1984. But that's what a boot disk is for. You're gonna boot the computer. And in fact, in the really early, this was really common in the Apple II days, but even in the early IBM PC days, you'd have games that would come out that were called booters. And they would have some kind of boot code on the disk, usually not a full version of DOS or anything, usually just enough boot code to like initialize the hardware and get things ready for the game, and then the game took up the rest of the disk. So you'd put the game disk into your computer and you turn it on, and it would just boot the disk and start the game. There were a whole bunch of games like that back in the day. There were even some like that for the original Mac. There were booters. Not a ton of them. They weren't super common, but there were a few booters for games for Mac. It was kind of cool. It was a weird time. It was a weird time. And then of course hard drives made boot disks basically obsolete, unless something got hosed and you needed to boot the computer to fix whatever was installed on the hard drive. But yeah, that's what boot disks are for. Yeah. Yeah, things were bad. Back in the day, things were bad. If you had a Commodore 64 or a VIC-20 and you were poor, like me back in the day, you didn't have even a floppy drive, because the floppy drive was an add-on for those computers, and what you probably had was literally a cassette player, and you would save and load your programs to tape. So you type in the command in the ROM basic that prepped the machine to load off the tape, and then you'd hit the play button on the tape player. Either you'd have the official one, like the Commodore dataset that was all the rage back in the 80s. Very cool looking, weird, like rounded design cassette player that plugged into the back of like the VIC-20 or the C64 with its own dedicated plug. Or you just use the audio jacks on the back of the machine to literally just plug in a tape player, just a cassette player. Like you just have like a portable cassette player, and you just hit play on it, and it would play back, some awful modulated tones, and it would load the program into RAM. Yeah, cassette tape, not even like reel-to-reel tape, not even like the mainframes like you see if you watch an old Bond movie. They go to the villain's lair. They'll have like rows of big reel-to-reel tape machines in the background, but this was just like audio cassette, like Philips compact cassette, just terrible old audio cassette to save your stuff on. And that's what you saved your data on. Tapes were absolutely flimsy. And, you did lose data. Absolutely. It wasn't great. It's why I call them the bad old days. Things were not great back then. But yeah, at some point I do want to like show off my Mac Plus, because I have that, I don't know if you saw, but I have that external floppy drive for it. Like that's a high roller system for a Mac Plus, right? Like if you have the 2 floppy drives, you're doing well. You can load 2 disks at once. Because if you have your boot disk, right? So you have your boot disk. In the case of an original Mac, it has 400 kilobytes of data, 400 kilobytes of space. Your Mac system software, if you're talking something old, System 3, something like that, it's going to take up like 250K on that 400K disk. And then you throw your application on there, it's maybe another 120K or so. You don't have a lot of space left. You have like 20 kilobytes of space left on the disk to save things. So then you get out another disk, and it's your save disk. This was super common with games, especially like back in the Apple II days. You'd have your game disk and your save disk. Right, when you wanted to save your game, you'd do the thing in the menu and it'd say, okay, ready to save game, eject your disk. So you'd pop the disk out of the disk drive, and then pop in your save disk, and it would save your game to the save disk, and then ask you back for the game disk so it could continue running code off the game disk. And the early Macs were the same way. You had to, if you had the one floppy drive built into the machine, you'd boot up on one disk, and you wanted to save something, more than likely, you'd have to eject that disk, and then go to save on the second disk, and it would ask you back for the other disk. You'd just be swapping disks for like 20 minutes trying to get your file saved. It was a bad time. It was a bad time. So if you had the 2 floppy drives, you were styling, right? Like you could boot off of your boot disk and put your save disk in the second floppy drive, and you'd never have to worry about swapping floppies ever again. And then System 7 came along and it had 12 install disks. Oh, time marches on. Time marches on. Yeah, Gutbomb mentions the data rates on the tapes were really slow, so like WoW and Flutter wasn't really an issue. Yeah. Also, the save and load, the modulation that they used for it had some checksums built in, so that that made it even slower to load because you had to load data and then load the checksum and then check the data and then load more data and check the checksum. And then you'd have some games like on the Sinclair and the C64 especially. This was a very prominent thing called speed loaders, where they load a chunk of program, right, just using the normal loading routine that's built into the ROM on the machine. And that's the thing, again, ROMs, that tape save load routine that turns the data bits into audio pulses and reads them back from the tape, that's all in ROM. It's all controlled by the onboard hardware on the C64 or the Spectrum or whatever you're loading and saving on tape with. So what would happen is you'd have a speed loader game that would load up. It would load the loader that would then start. It would start execution at that code that just got loaded in off the tape. And then that code had like compression routine built into it to decompress the rest of the tape. And usually also some crazy visuals and maybe some music. So while you're loading your game up, so you type in the command to load off the tape. You hit play on the tape. It would start loading like normal, and then after a couple of seconds, like the screen would start going like crazy colors, and you'd get the fast loader, and the fast loader would start loading compressed data off of the tape into the system memory. And if it was a very flashy game, you'd get some music and maybe even some cool demo effects while it was loading. That's kind of where the 1 kilobyte demo entries came from. If you're familiar with the demo scene, you've got like 64K demos that fit within 64 kilobytes. But there's also like 1K or even boot sector demos that just live on the very first bootable blocks of a storage device and just do stuff. Sometimes it's not good stuff, and that's where boot sector viruses came from. But, sometimes it's just, benign, fun graphics and sound that screw with your hardware. It's a good time. Oh, yeah, Gutbomb says the fast loaders were more common on disk. They did exist for tape, too. Yeah, no, I wouldn't imagine they'd help a lot with the tape speed. Yeah. I think it was mostly just like, here's a consolation prize. While we're loading the rest of the game. Then please don't turn off your Commodore. You can actually play the game. Give us a couple of minutes. Oh. I had a VIC-20 back when I was a kid, and I had a couple of those like programming books where it was like spiral bound, right? So you had a spiral bound, so you could open it up and lay it flat. And in the back of it, like the back half of the book, would be programs that you can type in. Like literally, you type in pages and pages of code, usually just basic, typing into the ROM basic on the VIC-20, and you'd get like a little game that like played some music or something. And it was like, you'd spend 2 hours typing in the program and hoping you got it right, and double checking what you typed in versus what was on the page. And then you hit run. And hopefully it doesn't blow up, and hopefully you get something fun out of it. Although usually it just didn't do that much, because even 2 hours of typing code in manually wasn't going to get you a whole lot of stuff, in ROM basic. HC says, programmers did bare metal everything back then, right? Sorta. There were a couple of utilities you could use. Some systems had like hardware level monitors where you could inspect registers in the CPU to see like what was going on. As far as bare metal, like, yeah, you weren't coding C on this thing. Basic was probably the most abstracted you were going to get. But if you wanted any performance out of your program, you were going to be programming in machine language, right? Assembler. and then you know, compiling and assembling it. Not compiling it because it was, yeah, whatever. You know what I mean? Not quite compiling it with assembler. You type out opcodes and you add the parameters to those opcodes, and those get translated into machine code. Clarge on OnePlus says the books would basically write themselves. Yeah, yes, so Gutbomb is correct. Lots of stuff was done in BASIC back in the day, but you'd always peek and poke direct memory addresses if you wanted to. And that's literally direct memory addresses. Like you had the full, however much RAM the machine had. In the case of a VIC-20, you know, 3.5K. On a C64, you had the full 64K. Some areas, of course, were mapped into like ROM and drivers for hardware and stuff. But you could poke at it if you wanted through BASIC, and in some cases, like if you poked at a memory address that corresponded to like a video chip register, you could change the color of the screen. Just, you know, send a bit to a memory address, change the whole color of the screen. It was a weird time back then. It was a weird time. But yeah, that's the evolution of computers is incredible. You know, today we've got smartphones and tablets, but it all can be traced back to, you know, 8-bit home computers and even before then. It's really interesting to see how we've come and how far it's evolved. Gutbomb says, my first computer was also a VIC-20. It's my only computer from age 6 to age 12. Nice. Nice, nice. The computer that really ruined me for computers was my 486, of course. When I had a complete 486 just in my childhood bedroom, I could do anything I wanted with it. Oh boy, that was good times. That was good times. The VIC-20 was fun, but the 486 was something else. All right. Well, I don't have a whole lot for everybody today. With Global Talk not working on the PowerMac, we don't have a whole lot to do. So I think I might actually wrap it up. We've just been streaming for an hour, but hopefully y'all have had a good time. Anything else anybody wants to look at on this machine? It's pretty old. I don't need to save that. Pretty old PowerMac. This is actually, the 7200 is 1995, to give you an idea. 1995. We'll do one more thing before we end. Oh no, it's trying to play music. No. So this version of Doom for classic Mac OS, yeah, tries to play music through the QuickTime musical instruments. It's bad. It's really bad. Give me no music, thank you. Yikes! Yikes, yikes, yikes. So yeah, it's not a super fast machine. 75 megahertz PowerPC. It's more like a 75 megahertz 486 with a really bad graphics card. But yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna end it for today. Sorry I couldn't get this to... And then of course it crashes. 752 is not a great OS. It's not a great OS. Gutbomb asks, have I tried the Doom 1 port for the VIC-20? I have not. I've heard of it. I've not tried it. My VIC currently does not work. I need a new power supply for it. Once I sort that out, I think it still functions. I do need to open it up and check out all the stuff. Caps and stuff in it. I don't know what shape it's in. HC asks, can it dial out to a server? I don't think this one has a modem. So the way you do a modem on a Mac at this time was you'd use one of those serial ports, and so you'd have... Where did I put that? Where did I put it? Where did I put it? Anyway, you know that mini DIN port I was showing you with the network adapters. You'd plug a modem into that, and it'd be like, you know, it'd be a little plastic box that you plug a phone line into, and it'd be a modem. So modems were external, mostly external modems on Macs at the time. So I don't have a modem for it, so dialing out is not going to happen. Gutbomb says caps are probably not an issue. All right, cool. Trina says get a Quadra 650. Okay, fine, I will. Clargen asks, have you gotten any of your systems onto the Appletalk network yet? No, I haven't. And part of what I did this morning was figuring out why I haven't seen any PowerMacs on the Appletalk network, and the reason is it doesn't work with PowerPC. It directly patches the macOS system file with 68K code that doesn't get emulated correctly, and so it crashes the machine once it patches it. So let's shut this thing down correctly this time. I do want to update this to 755 because that's what I was running before, and it runs pretty nicely on 755, honestly. It's not bad with that OS on it. 752, kind of terrible. Anyway, thank y'all for coming, and I'm so sorry I couldn't get something onto the Appletalk network today, but we'll work on it. We'll work on it. I don't think it's going anywhere. It seems to be a more than just a Macintosh project for the Apple retro enthusiasts out there. So maybe one of these days, see if I can track down a Quadra 650, get it on to Appletalk. All right, so I hope everybody has a good day and a good rest of your weekend, and I will talk to y'all next week. Hopefully before then, I will have a video out, because I'm just about finished with this video, so soon. Hopefully I can get it out tomorrow. We'll see. Have a good one. It was a great stream. Good to see y'all.